Shalom to everyone. This week we are going to read the Parashat of Terumah, which we find in the book of Exodus, chapters 25 verse 1 to chapters 27 verse 19. And Terumah, which can be translated as a contribution or as an offering, or as some would say, and translated as a gift, we find in verse 2 of chapters 25. And this parashat deals with the Mishkan, and specifically refers to as a sacred dwelling place, the establishment of a sacred dwelling place for God. Now, in this parasha, in a nutshell, there are so much detail that's been given to us in the construction of the tabernacle of Moses, that it would take many lessons to actually even cover each item and even each materials. There are so many information presented within the tabernacle of Moses that it is really impossible to be able to provide sufficient information within even a half an hour, 2 hours. But in a nutshell, this week the parasha deals with the contribution of different materials to the Mishkan. And the important, or the focus of the teaching this week is why God has asked the nation of Israel to contribute to this dwelling place, to this sanctuary. And the reason God says to Moses is, they shall make for me a sanctuary that I shall dwell amidst them. So we see in this parasha that God says the reason that you receive this, and the reason that there is a contribution that they have to make towards this, is because I want to dwell amidst them. Now later on we will look at the prayer of Solomon, where he asks this question: how is it possible that God wants to dwell among the people, even on earth? So we can see then, on Mount Sinai, Moses is given a detailed instruction in this parasha on how to construct this dwelling place, or this Mishkan. And we can see that this instruction for this Mishkan is not that of a permanent structure. It's something that can be dismantled, transported, reassembled as the people journeyed in the desert. So we see also in the sanctuary there's an inner chamber, there is an ark, there's tablets of the testimony that's got 10 commandments on it. There's the ark cover that stood 2 winged cherubims on it, hammered out with gold. The outer chamber, we see the menorah there, we see the table of showbread. We see that the walls are fitted together with 48 upright wooden boards. Everything is overlaid with gold, and there is so much detail, so much coverings, and we see the layer of coverings over this tabernacle: tapestry of multicolored wool and linen, a cover made with goat hair, a covering of ram and tahashkins. Tahash is basically, it's probably an animal that is its extinct. We don't really know what is a tahash. Some would translate it as a dolphin or a seal, but it would actually refer to just as a leather skin. And then we would see that the sanctuary is surrounded with wooden posts. There's an altar. There's so much details given within the construction of this dwelling place. Now, the focus of this teaching is not on the details of this Mishkan, as much as there are many teaching out there that would cover each item within the Mishkan. focusing this teaching on the reason why the Mishkan has been given. This dwelling place. And the reason that's given to us in this parasha is because God wants to dwell among their people. So if we can say the pattern or shadow or cornerstone or foundational stone why God has given this is because this is a way that God wants to dwell among his people. So we can see in verse 8 and 9 of chapters 25 that this structure is being referred to into the Hebrew language in two different manners. In verse 8 it says, and let them make me a sanctuary that I will dwell among them. And then it uses the Hebrew word mikdash. And in verse 9 it says, exactly as I show you the pattern of the tabernacle and the pattern of all its furnishings shall you make it. And when it refers then to the tabernacle, it uses hamishkan, the tabernacle. So in verse 8 and 9, the Hebrew language uses two different terms for the structure that would be given to Moses. One is mikdash and one is mishkan. Now, when we look at the commentaries and we're looking at the scholars, most people would say, well, when you talk about Mishkan or when you talk about Mikdash, you would actually refer to the same thing or the same item. But there is a difference between a Mishkan and a Mikdash. And the commentaries would say the Mishkan, referring to the tabernacle, was a temporary Mikdash. It was a temporary dwelling place, a temporary sanctuary. And this is the plans that was given to Moses, this temporary sanctuary. But it refers to, in verse 8, the Mikdash, as something that is of permanence. So we see again here that the Hebrew language gives us a clue that God wants to dwell among them, but now how does God want to dwell them among a permanent tabernacle? But we know that the tabernacle blueprint that's been given to Moses wasn't a permanent structure. It was a temporary structure. It's a structure that could be assembled and disassembled and could be moved. And eventually, today we know that the tabernacle of Moses is not among us. The second temple has been erected. That has been destroyed. And we are waiting for the third tabernacle. So, the third temple. So we're asking ourselves the question, so what is the Torah referring to when he says, I want to make a permanent dwelling, a mikdash, and I want to dwell among them? Now we can see, when we look at Solomon, he's even asking this question, that how is it possible that God wants to dwell among even the earth, which, remember, God created the earth in 7 days, the creation. So there is no better testimony of God's greatness than his own creation, the earth. And then Solomon goes even further and says that even the heavens to their uttermost reaches cannot contain you, referring to the galaxies, the universe, far among the widest galaxies or the furthest galaxies within the universe cannot even contain the greatness of God. So how much less this house that I have built, and how much less is it able for God to dwell among his people? So we can see that the commentaries and the rabbis and the scholars over many years have dwelled upon this question and has asked this question and have have discussed them among them, and then have come up and says, well, the pattern that was given to Moses is a representation of each of the universe, of the creation of God, of the heaven that God created, the heaven and the earth, the stars. It's even a shadow and a pattern of earth itself. So the details that we can find within this tabernacle of Moses, the type of materials that is being used, can correspond to various creations within the universe. Therefore, God gives a blueprint to Moses and says, this is the place that I want to dwell in, because it represents even much further than we can even think and realize. And it's taken many years of studies to understand all the details. Why this, how many so. Every minute detail is still being studied today. So we see that the Mishkan represents the greater of creation, and therefore God has given this as a blueprint to Moses and says, this is where I want to dwell. But the ultimate blueprint that we eventually understand, and we know that the sanctuary then represents man himself. That even the holy, the most holy, all these is a representation of man himself, and God wants to dwell within man. He wants to dwell among man. So we can see that what's given to Moses is far more than we can do in this teaching. It's far more than we can even comprehend in the type of materials that's been used. So when God refers to this as a mikdash, the permanence of it, it refers to what this tabernacle represents. Is something very eternal. So we can see the details within it, the utmost details. Each have a representation of something in creation, and even referring to man himself. So the materials donated for the Mishkan can correspond to the components of the human being himself. The materials donated to the Mishkan corresponds even to the heavens, and is even equivalent to the universe, to the 7-day creation. We can actually find a corresponding material towards each day of creation, the 7th day of creation. So the question is why does God then, in his greatness, decide, and what is the purpose then of the Mishkan, that God wants to dwell then among them? And the answer comes from Rabbi Shneir Zalman of Liadi, when he says, well, this is what it's all about. This is the purpose of his creation. He did all this, and he has given this blueprint to Moses for this specific thing, representing the Mishkan, representing the higher and the lower realms, because God wants to dwell within his creation. This is the purpose of everything, that God wants to dwell among the people. So we see this becomes the foundation of what we are going to read in Parashat Terumah as a dwelling place for God. The second temple will be a dwelling place. The third temple erected will be a dwelling place. And man, the creation of God, is created for one purpose, and the sole purpose is for God to dwell within, for God to tabernacle within man. So if we then refer back to verse 2 and we start looking at how God gives the instructions, and you would almost highlight the most important first in a construction. This is what you have to do first. And after that, you would then present more details. We can see the Torah will start giving us in verse 2 the construction, or the foundation of the construction happens in a certain way. And it's described in verse 2 where it says, "Tell the Israelite people to bring me gifts. You shall accept gifts from me and from every person whose heart is so moved." So typically when we would write a book or something that we need to convey to a reader, we would probably say, "Tell the Israelite people to bring me gifts, those whose heart is so moved." We won't almost repeat ourselves. "Tell the Israelite people to bring me gifts. You shall accept gifts for me from every person whose heart is so moved." So we can see that the Hebrew grammar and the Hebrew sentence divides it into two sections. The one is, "Tell the people Israel to bring me gifts," and the second is, "You shall accept these gifts from every person whose heart is so moved." Now, with the many years of trying to understand Hebrew, I have just come to a understanding that the depth of the Hebrew language is so vast that even the best translation would have done the best to capture the depth of what the text wants to tell us. But even in our greatest attempts, there would always be somehow a lacking to translate and convey what the writer and God himself wants to give to the people in another language than Hebrew itself. So if we have to then look at this first section of the verse and we have to translate it into almost a word for word translation, we'll see that the English comes out a bit different. And it says, "Daber el bnei Yisrael v'yikchu." It says, "Speak to the sons of Israel, and they shall take a contribution offering of me." Daber is speak. So some of the translations would say tell, but there is a difference between telling and speaking. Speaking to the sons of Israel. V'yikchu. And the word vayikhu comes from the word lakach. It means you shall take from them. Not just bringing an offering. It says the action refers to you shall take this offering, this terumah, this contribution or offering, and in some translation it would talk about a gift. So the first sections of this verse tells us that Moses speak to the people of Israel, "You shall take this contribution offering of me." So it's not just a question of bringing, it's more than that. It's about Moses must take this contribution offering. And then in the second portion of this verse, it would refer to this contribution offering in a certain way. That says every man who he is willing. So it's not just about bringing an offering, but it's about the state in which this offering is being brought. So every man must be willing. Where, and it talks, it uses the Hebrew word livo, talking about lev, the heart. So he must be willing in his heart, And then the action is tikhu, lakach, you shall take this terumah. So we see the foundation of erecting the tabernacle of Moses is done in a very, very specific way. And the way that the materials then is provided for the erection of the tabernacle is also done in a very specific way. And we can refer this to when it's not just a matter of giving, but it's an action that God speak to the children of Israel. You shall free willingly from your heart bring your offering. You shall present your offering from me. And then he commands Moses. It's not a case that we have seen in so many places where they send baskets around and you just put offerings within a basket. No, it's very specifically, each one shall present his offering before me, and then you look at his heart, you look at his willingness, and you shall take it from there. There's an action that they present to you and you take. And the next person would come and they would present their gifts, present their contribution, their offering before Moses. And Moses then will take it from them. So just focusing on how this tabernacle of Moses, the way that God has commanded that even the materials be gathered together in such a specific way, that you shall present yourselves free willingly before the high priest, or before Moses, and Moses shall take it from you. And we can see that the pattern of this foundation stone in the erection of this tabernacle, we find actually in the sacrifices going forward, that a person needed to present himself before the tabernacle, before the priest. And he would come to the priest and I would say, I present myself before God. Please take this contribution, this offering from me. And then there would be rituals and there would be things that the high priest needed to do. For which offering are this? And have you created with your neighbor? Have you paid your debts? There is certain things that needed to happen. But the individual had to free willingly always come to the dwelling place of God to present himself, present his offering, and therefore the offering always will be taken from them. A very specific, unique way that God has started the erection of this tabernacle of Moses in this one specific way, and we would see that even that would continue then in the sacrifices. We would even see that continuing as a shadow and pattern within the Tanakh, that a person free willingly needs to present him before God. And when the motive and the offering that he brings before God is then given, God will take it from them. So we can see that the way that the start of the erection of this temple is done in a very, very specific way. And we can see in the Midrash, if we just have to refer to to man. The materials donated in the Mishkan correspond to the components of the human being. And it says gold can be connected to the soul of man. Gold, we know, is an indestructible material. Gold can be ground to dust and been put into the ground, and you can dig up the ground again, you can melt it, and you will have gold again. It's an indestructible material. So the soul that God has created is an indestructible life force. It will maybe move from this life to the life hereafter, but the soul will continue, and therefore it will also give us then the midrash corresponds to the silver, the copper, the various type of materials to the various parts of a human. But gold, the indestructible, is referred to the soul, and God wants His dwelling place to be covered with this gold. This whole pattern is filled with gold. God is looking at the soul. The soul is the importance. God gives us a pattern within the tabernacle of Moses that we should be free willingly come before Him and offer our soul as a contribution, as an elevation, as an elevating offering before God. Our soul, our heart, our mind, and that's why it says, and you shall love God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might, with everything, with all your resources. That is not just about presenting ourselves, but to presenting free willingly. And when we do that, then for that reason, Moses is then instructed to take the offering. Now, if we have to refer that to tefillah, to prayer, we have to ask ourselves if we have to present our prayer in a similar manner. Do we present ourselves before God in a prayer and I say, God, I place myself before you today, and this is my request, and this is my blessings, and this is everything that I present before you today. Will you please take it from me? Please take my terumah before God. This is the pattern that has been set in the tabernacle of Moses. But we know that prayer sometimes in life just brings a person to a point that it's almost a place where we drop off things. A prayer becomes a place where we drop off our problems, our offerings, our thanksgiving. It's just a matter of dropping off, and then we go and we continue. But this is not what God intended in the blueprint of the tabernacle, that you should present yourself before God with a free willing offering, and you would present yourself until He takes your terumah, your contribution, your elevating offering. Not just in prayer and tefillah, but in everything that we do in life should be in this matter, that God should take it from us as a contribution, as an offering, a contribution to His creation, a contribution to His dwelling place. Wherever I am in my workplace, wherever I am in life, I contribute, and therefore God can take this as an offering. That is way that terumah describes the construction of the tabernacle of Moses starts is completely different to the way that we live our lives and do it. And we would even read within the Tanakh that God even asks us, is it really the offerings that I am looking for rather than a contrite heart? Is it really the offerings that God is looking for, but rather than the way that the offering is being presented before God in order for Him to take it? A dwelling place, the foundation stone, the foundation plan that's been given to us. That God wants to dwell among those, and He wants to take their elevation offering from them, from those whose heart is moved. Our service to God is a matter of the heart. What is God really asking us? Is He asking us to serve Him because in the end there is a reward, there is a life hereafter, there's a reward, there's a punishment? Is this the reason that God wants us to serve Him? Are we serving God because we're always looking for a reward, or we're always maybe scared of a punishment? There is a story of a man that traveled on a long road, a righteous man. And this man had so much emunah, betachon in God, faith and trust in God, that he never went to sleep with money in his pocket. Every night before he goes to sleep, he would give away this money because he believed that God would provide the next day. And therefore, in the circumstances, this man was on a night before Pesach, and he didn't have a place to go and have Pesach. And there was a man that wanted to know this righteous man, and he was looking for this righteous man. And therefore this righteous man asked him to join him at the Pesach meal at his house. So this righteous man blesses this man with a lot of children. And God tells this righteous man that because you have blessed him with many children, and he wasn't supposed to have many children, therefore I will take the life hereafter away from you. So this man jumps up in joy, and he starts dancing in joy. So he asks this righteous man, why are you so happy after I've taken away the life hereafter from you? And the answer was, because now I have no reason to serve, but just to do it because you are the Creator and you are God. There's no reward of punishment or of reward hereafter. I do it because I need to do it. You are God. If we are presented in the same way, if we are presented in everything that we do, there is no reward, there is no punishment, would we still serve God with an upright heart, without any motivation? This righteous man realized that now, for the first time in his life, he is in a position to serve God without getting anything back or being afraid of anything. I think this story might have some of the details wrong in the story, but it just brings us to the point that God wants us to serve Him because He is God. And He wants us to be free willingly in front of Him with our contribution offering, with a heart that is moved before him, so that he can take this offering from us, this elevation offering, this contribution from us, because this is the reason that God has created man, so that man could serve him because he is God. And with this, I would want us to look into this week, this upcoming week, and everything that we do, everything that we go, that we get ourselves to a position, that we place ourselves in a position where we present ourselves, even our difficulties, even in our prayer this week, that we present ourselves before God with hands upright. Say, God, here I present myself before you. Please take my offering. And with that, I wish you a Shabbat Shalom.